2050. And I want to welcome everyone to this session. What is Heartland 2050? Heartland 2050 is a community-driven initiative. We pull in stakeholders from across the region, thinking big picture and working towards a common vision for our community. The Housing and Development Committee meets on the third Thursday every other month from 3 to 4:30, and you guys are joining us for our regular meeting time slot here. And we have invited Meridith Dillon to come and speak, to present her report. There you go, her comprehensive housing assessment. Meridith is with the Sherwood Foundation, a former planner with the city of Omaha. She's been involved in a variety of Heartland 2050 committees. That's how I know Meridith. And I'm sure a number of you also know Meridith. So as it says here, Meridith currently sits on our Regional Planning Advisory Committee, and we're really excited to have Meridith come present. And also, I just want to say thanks to all of the community members that have joined us this afternoon. By my count, it looks like there's about 85 folks on this call. So thank you very much for joining us. Meridith, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Yes, one good reminder. We're going to be doing questions and answers at the end. But if you can plug any questions that you have for Meridith into the chat box, I'll be compiling those questions, and we'll do a Q&A at the end. The only other thing that I request is that everyone keeps themselves muted throughout the presentation. With that, I believe I will turn it over to Meridith.
Great, thanks, Zach. I'm going to try to share my screen here without messing up too much. And we can kind of get started here. All right. Well, thanks again for having me today. I'm excited to see so many people interested in talking about affordable housing. It's been great to share this presentation with a lot of you. I saw that there's a few on here who have probably already seen it, so you're going to become an expert and be able to share it yourself soon here. But I wanted to give you a little context behind the nature of this study. We really set out initially to just better understand what currently exists in terms of affordable housing and what might be needed over the next 20 years. And who the players in the game are in terms of providing affordable housing, funding affordable housing, just to get a better look and understanding. What started out as something that would serve philanthropy and strategic investment and really help us to better understand and be more strategic in our thinking and investing around housing became something that I think is useful for our community in terms of just having a discussion about affordable housing. And we also pretty quickly learned that the scope of the problem in terms of our need for affordable housing isn't something that the philanthropic community alone can solve. And so we're excited to share this with you and asking for all of your partnership in the ways that you can advocate for affordable housing. So that's the context of really what the study was about. And we'll kind of get going. So the case for affordable housing. So affordable housing, housing touches everything. I think it's really easy to think about housing development in terms of economic development or land use, or even thinking about our neighborhoods and park spaces. But we sometimes forget that affordable housing and housing itself is also really attached to things like education and health. I think, we saw over the last year how COVID-19 really exposed the housing instability in our community and how many families were potentially one paycheck away from losing their homes, whether that was their rental units or, housing that they own. And so we saw this really come into play in real life this last year with COVID-19. So I like this graphic because I think it's a great way to show all the areas that housing touches. Affordable housing is an investment in health. Nationally, we see that a child living with housing insecurity is 28% more likely to be underweight, They visit ERs more often, 59% more often, even just due to asthma. That often has to do with the quality of housing or the neighborhoods that they're located in having more environmental risks. The children living with housing insecurity also have a higher risk of family separation. In Omaha and Council Bluffs, which was our study area, we'll take a closer look at that map here shortly. We see that 15% of more households across Omaha and Council Bluffs, it's actually Douglas County, Sarpy County, and the city of Council Bluffs, pay 15% of those pay more than half of their income on housing. So when we think about that in terms of HUD standard, that is considered an extreme housing burden. And there are 20,000 children living in those homes that are paying more than half their income to housing. 250 children across the state of Nebraska last year were removed from their homes because of housing instability. So we're going to look at how difficult it really is to have housing instability based on wages. And when we think about families being separated because of this, that's something that our community really needs to address. Affordable housing is also an investment in education. Nationally, we see that for every move, a child falls behind 3 months academically for just one move. And children who experience homelessness are 21% less likely to graduate from high school. Omaha, we see that schools with higher eviction rates have 67% of students testing below average on standardized tests compared to less than 50% as schools with lower eviction rates. And affordable housing is a cost-effective way to prevent and address homelessness. So nationally, we see that taxpayers pay on average about $36,000 a year to provide wraparound services for folks who are chronically homeless. And when we look at the cost to provide supportive housing and permanent supportive housing, we see that that costs at $13,000 a year. So it's 3 times more to actually support folks who are chronically homeless rather than actually providing a home. And we know that that is true here in Omaha as well. In 2018, 3,500 people experienced homelessness for the first time in our community, and 20% of those that were homeless or part of the homeless population have households with children. $27 million was invested in homeless services in 2018. Affordable housing also drives economic development. So nationally, for every 100 units of affordable housing, in just the first year of that housing being created, it generates $8 million in local income and 122 jobs, again, from each of those 100 units. Families that are living in dedicated affordable housing are able to spend 5 times more on healthcare, 30% more on quality food, and 2 times more on retirement savings. So families who are getting that assistance and have that dedicated housing also are able to reinvest in themselves and in their communities. Between 2009 and 2018, 2,700 LIHTC units that were added to the region resulted in an economic impact of $250 million in local income, $22 million in tax revenue, and 3,300 jobs to the local economy. So affordable housing is also really an economic driver. High-level findings from our study, this probably won't come as a surprise to most of you, but the housing cost burden is prevalent across the region. So it particularly impacts renters and people of color. Again, we saw that during COVID-19 as well. There's a deep unmet need for quality, dedicated, affordable housing. Demand for quality, affordable, and workforce housing is growing at a rate that is much more quickly than we are actually producing it. And thousands of units will lose their affordability restrictions without preservation action. So we're talking about LIHTC projects or state tax credits that are dedicated for affordable housing that are actually getting ready to expire and will be at risk to become unaffordable. Some areas that are generally thought to be more affordable in Omaha are experiencing the highest rates of rent increase as well as home value. Dedicated affordable housing isn't located and produced in areas that, again, according to HUD, we would consider access to opportunity, so have the highest access to jobs, to education, to health. The shortage of workforce housing puts middle income buyers in competition with low income households. So for example, if there is an apartment that's for rent and it's considered to be 30% or less of, let's say, what our average median income is in the MSA, $77,000 a year. So at 30% of that cost, if we have someone who's making that average median income and someone else who's making, let's say, 120% or 150% of that average median income, and they're in competition with one another, we know that cash and credit will always, or generally will win when it comes to competing for an apartment or a home. We're especially seeing that in the home ownership market right now. So we're going to take a look at our focus area for the study. And back this up a little. So we broke the study area down into 6 sub areas. And one of the things I will say, I know that we've titled this as a comprehensive housing assessment. This isn't in terms of, again, according to HUD or any kind of planning department's housing assessment, we didn't have the same kinds of restrictions, and we didn't necessarily look at the same things to check those boxes that you might see from a regulatory standpoint. And that was really a gift, because we were able to look at the subcategories in ways that we know our community. And so when we looked at those subcategories, again, Douglas County, Sarpy County, and the city of Council Bluffs were selected because they represent more of an urban housing ecosystem. So we don't take into account the more rural areas, which also have affordability challenges, but we wanted to be really specific about the more urban areas. And then some of the naturally divided lines that we know in our community are different. 72nd Street for example, in Omaha. And then again, you'll see this is Harrison Street separating Douglas County and Sarpy County. So if that gives you some context to this map. So it's difficult to have a conversation about affordable housing if we don't define it. And it's difficult to define what's affordable for one person as compared to another, because the standard we use is the standard HUD uses, again, that 30% or less of the average median income. So when we think about housing income, my house and my neighbor's house, those are going to be 2 different average incomes, right, in our home income. And so it differs from person to person, or from household to household, rather. You're going to have a different 30%. So we took the average and looked at what it would cost to rent a 2-bedroom, safe quality unit in our community. So $930 a month. I would argue that it's still difficult to find an average apartment or an apartment with decent quality, safe housing for $930 a month right now. But that's what we found to be that average median income of 30% or less. And in order to have an income, a household income that would qualify for this, it would require an $18 an hour housing wage. So your house has to make $18 per hour. There are a lot of families with single parents, or that there's only one person working in the home, or we just have individuals. And we know that our minimum wage right now is not $18 an hour. We're arguing nationally for $15 an hour, right? So I think this tells us, again, that for most folks, that 30% or less is out of reach when it comes to affordable. Sorry, I'm having a hard time with this mouse here. So when we looked at the community, again, in those sub areas, our households that are paying more than 30% of income towards housing, we saw that in Eastern Omaha, so east of 72nd Street, has the highest percentage of people or households that are paying more than 30%. That's followed by Council Bluffs. Again, when we think about that concept that areas that traditionally have been considered more affordable are becoming less affordable, this statistic, I think, shows us that. Affordable areas are experiencing rapid price increases. So home values, this shows us, again, in the home ownership market, home value growth between 2010 and 2017. The lighter color has the least amount of growth, and the darker colors have the highest home value growth. And again, we see in this eastern portion of Omaha, this is the area that had home values increase the most. And we also see in Council Bluffs, right across the river, we have some really dark areas there as well. And then the western portion of Sarpy County. this is the same set of years, 2010 to 2017. And when we look at the increase in median rents, you're going to see again a large portion of concentration in that middle, the eastern part of Omaha through our, again, downtown kind of midtown area. But western Sarpy County has actually the highest increase in rents. So when we mapped out where our current subsidized and or dedicated affordable housing, according to, again, either investments from our state tax dollars, so the LIHTC projects, or our housing, or our public housing Section 8 vouchers, when we mapped out where those are, we see that those are also located, the majority of them, in the eastern portion of Omaha. So we currently have almost 20,000 units of dedicated affordable housing. And the number of households that would actually qualify for subsidy, if we looked at who's paying more than 30% of their average median income, would actually be almost 100,000 households that could qualify or would need some kind of subsidy to keep their housing for them affordable. And this is a graph that actually just, I think, shows that need and the projection for the need really well. So right now, again, almost 80,000 unit gap of what we have and what is needed. And when we look at things like what's happening in our job markets and what types of jobs are growing, when we look at our population growth, which, by the way, was a Heartland 2050 projection, and also take into account, again, what households are making now, we see that in the next 20 years, the gap only grows. So 104,000 dedicated units of affordable housing is our projection. I will tell you that the folks that did this study are consultants, they're market experts, and I really trust this number, and I think it's actually really conservative because their estimation also would include all of the units that are currently affordable, that are naturally occurring affordable housing, which a lot of us know that often means they're units that are in really poor quality and probably need a lot of reinvestment, and they're not the kind of quality housing we want families living in, that they would have to remain affordable. It also means that the LIHTC projects that are currently in that affordability period would continue to be affordable. And I think that again, not taking those into this estimate probably means that the number could be even greater. So when we think about what currently exists, again, these sub areas, so we have things broken down into, you can see that this is housing units overall. So each of those boxes represents 1,000 units of housing, either, you know, a rental unit or a home. We see that the majority of the housing we have in eastern and western Omaha is single family detached. We have very few units of single family attached. And then that 2 to 4 unit housing, which often is referred to as that like missing middle piece in the design that we think about with missing middle, we have very few of those as well. And when we look at what we've been building, this is kind of tells us why we have what we have, right? So since 2000, 73% of new residential construction has been single family housing. Just 2% of those are buildings that have 2 to 4 units. And this is another map to kind of show it, tells a story about where we have affordable housing currently located, and where HUD's term is access to opportunity. This really is the Child Opportunity Index is a national measurement of where resources are. So again, economic access to education, environmental health. When we map this out in our community, you'll see that the areas where we have currently have subsidized housing and that's dedicated and affordable is also in the areas that score the lowest on the Child Opportunity Index. I'll also tell you that many of you have probably seen the maps where we look at formerly redline communities, and we know that the reason we have this map here is because of historic redlining and institutional racism. So we know that because there has been intentional disinvestment in these portions of our community, that there's less access to opportunity. So my argument would be that we really need to bring those resources to these areas. But I think it also tells us that we are placing, dedicated affordable housing in areas that need more resources. We know that we are locating folks in areas where they are going to place potentially additional burden in those areas. So we're concentrating poverty in this way when we aren't being thoughtful about all of the locations that it's possible to put affordable housing, or when we have policy barriers or other challenges to creating affordable housing in other parts of our community. So when we look at the 104,000 units of housing that will be needed over the next 20 years, this is the breakdown of really what would be needed. So the different categories in that dark blue at the top, subsidized, low income, affordable, again, they all have the median incomes that are associated with those. And when we see investments, especially in the public sector, those often have some type of restriction. So they'll say that there's a percentage of them that have to be 30% AMI or less, or 60%. A lot of the tax credits and different programs that are provided by community block grant dollars or any other federal program as well would have some kind of attachment to these different average median incomes. And you can also see in light gray that it has the income that's associated with those. So this breaks down kind of what will be needed over the next 20 years. And then the light blue actually represents our rental market, and the dark blue our for sale market. That hashed line is what the current amount of units that are needed in that 80,000 unit gap. And then again, the solid is actually what's needed over the next 20 years. So we see that the majority of need comes in that workforce housing, 80 to 120% of the average median income. So this tells us that even, for what's average, or what people make on an average household, there's not going to be enough units for those families and those individuals. And we also know that to create workforce housing or below, anything below that 120% average median income requires some type of subsidy, because the cost of construction and the cost to actually make this type of housing work, it doesn't work on the numbers side if we leave things up to the free market. So the cost of the problem, it's a big one. $17.4 billion of investment is projected in order to address that 104,000 unit gap. It's $2 billion in rehabilitation and $15 billion in new construction. That seems like a lot of money until we take a look at the 9 foundations that actually funded this study. Those 9 foundations in 2018 alone granted $425 million in Omaha and Council Bluffs in 2018. And when we broke that down even further and we look at the types of investments, it told us another story, right? So education, health and food initiatives, youth development, human services, community services, all of these things that we're invested in. If you remember that wheel at the beginning, those are all things housing touches. And when we look at our investment in housing, $20 million went to housing. 12 million of that in 2018 was to a capital campaign for a shelter. So again, this really was sobering for us to sit back and think about whether or not we are funding problems that are downstream or upstream, right? Are we really looking at the root causes of these issues and trying to consider how could we provide housing and what types of things that might resolve that might not be as needed if folks have safe, healthy housing. And even when you think of Maslow's hierarchy, right? And you think about safe, quality housing and having shelter and knowing that you're safe, it's essential for people to be at their best. And really, when we think about, being able to show up as your best employee, or as the best parent you can be, or as the best student you can be, all of those things are really difficult if you don't have safe, healthy housing. So this, causes us to think maybe we need to turn upstream instead of putting more temporary solutions in place. And with every passing year, the challenge grows. So in just the year that it took us to finish the study, home prices have increased $13,000. Rents have increased by $60 a month, which for families often is the difference between being food secure and food insecure. And I think the other statistic that was sobering, again, it was COVID-19, but 108,000 households in Nebraska on September 1st would have been eligible for eviction if it hadn't been for the eviction moratorium. So when we took a look at the ecosystem, so again, as I mentioned, we were trying to understand what's the need and then who are the players, right? Who's participating in providing affordable housing. So we looked at those who are working on physical development, investments in people, and who focus on policy. And these are some of the folks that we ended up speaking with as stakeholders, and here's what they told us. That these are their priorities in terms of first, through fifth in those that we discussed. So to prevent and address housing instability, accelerate affordable housing production, preserve existing affordable housing, foster innovations to lower housing costs, so essentially affordability by design, and to provide relief in gentrifying areas. And when we broke that down further, we had conversations about what kinds of things could we do in each of these areas. And I know that this slideshow will be available, so I'm not going to go through all these separately. But one of the things that we did is, we took the data about what exists and what's needed, talked to the stakeholders, and then worked with the consultants to come up with strategies that would work for our current housing ecosystem. So we wanted to make certain that the strategies that they recommended are things that our community could support now. But I really like all of the ideas that stakeholders have, and I really think that another important part of this work for all of us is to grow capacity in our housing ecosystem overall. So the strategies I'm going to share with you are the 5 high-level strategies that we plan to move forward with as initiatives, and that we're working to gain support for here in our community. But there's a lot of other opportunity to grow capacity in our ecosystem so that we can continue to do more innovative things. So I'm going to go through each one of these. The Preservation Fund. The goal of this fund is to preserve existing affordable housing at a standard and high quality. So again, as we discussed, there's a lot of housing right now that is affordable because of LIHTC investment, so state tax credit investment, that could become at risk over the next, especially 10 years because of the timing of the LIHTC projects and when those started. And if we aren't reinvesting in those, there's a high risk that they could have to convert to market rate. A lot of that naturally occurring affordable housing also at risk. And there really aren't tools right now or subsidies that actually support preservation at this type of scale, like what we're talking about that's needed. Again, that 3,080 units, just LIHTC projects that will expire by 2030 alone. So the goal of the Preservation Fund is really to play a part in the capital stack for funding preservation in projects. So traditionally, we would see a bank loan, like a traditional bank loan, tax credits involved in a project like this. And then it also requires some developer equity. But often we see that there's about a 20% gap, even with all of those things that come into play. So unless the developer can bring 30% of their own equity to the table, which is often unlikely or very rare, it's very difficult to make preservation projects work. Again, these are all examples of preservation opportunities. And we included this example of the Colonial Hotel. I think that what a beautiful building, right? They did such a great job in redeveloping this hotel. But unfortunately, because there wasn't any really restrictions in place that would require affordability or any incentives in place that would ensure that there isn't a significant loss on investment or return on investment, then it really doesn't incentivize developers to include affordability in preservation projects. And so if we don't have tools for this, we are going to see a lot of the infrastructure in, again, that downtown, midtown, and north and south areas when folks are reinvesting and have preservation projects that often will become market rate. The precedent we use for this fund is the Detroit Housing for the Future Fund. It's a public-private partnership. Their goal is to preserve 10,000 units and develop 2,000 new units. They're at about 50 million right now, and they have a $75 million target. It was seeded with $10 million from the Sherwood Foundation, and it offers a mix of grants, low interest loans, and preferred equity products. So again, it's really looking at the market, looking at the project, and understanding at what point are there grants that are needed, and then also those low interest long-term loans. This project was also managed by LISC, which is a national fund manager. And the Preservation Fund, the potential impact. So if we looked in Omaha at making a $60 million investment in this preservation fund, at an average investment of $30,000 per unit, we could provide 2,000 units that are preserved. So this is 2/3 of the units that would be expiring in the next 10 years. So again, that goal is to create the ability in the capital stack so that we can preserve some of those expiring LIHTC projects or others. The development fund, similar concept here, but with new development. All the reasons that we need it, we kind of just discussed those, so I'm not going to go through that. But let's see here. The promising precedent, the Charlotte Housing Opportunity Fund, $100 million public-private partnership, again, seeded by the Foundation for the Carolinas. They are trying to finance 2,000 mixed income multifamily units of housing. We know that mixed income multifamily is a really great best practice when it comes to affordable housing. And this is also managed by LISC, and it has that same concept of grants and other program-related investments. Oops, I'm going to go back one. So when we think about opportunities for the development fund, one of the things that we also know is really important is to make sure folks have access to transit. And I think this is a great example when we look at this map. The dark blue pieces that you see there are actually parcels that currently are vacant lots. So they aren't for sale necessarily, but they are all opportunities when we think about new construction. If we have some type of incentive, hopefully in addition to some policy in place that would require some type of affordability in new construction, it gives us the opportunity to make sure that in these areas that we know we'll see an increase in both density and also an increase in interest for people to be living there because they have access to jobs. And again, think about the Blackstone district or other districts along transit lines where there's a lot of opportunity for folks. This is an important place to make sure we are including affordable housing, because if we're not intentional about it, it's not going to happen. Same concept in the capital stack, where we see that the development fund makes up 20% of the traditional capital that's needed to actually fund these projects. So the potential impact, if we brought this here to Omaha, total investment of $50 million, average investment per unit of 40,000 gives us 1,250 units. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's doubling the pace of production. So when we think about what we're producing now, this actually doubles the pace of production. Right to tenant council. This is something we're seeing here in the legislature, so I'm not going to go too far into this. And it's also, not just nationally that we're seeing this trend. This information is valid here locally. So Legal Aid has a housing justice project right now, and I know that they've shared with us that when they see folks have tenants that have counsel, that 80 to 90% right now of the cases that they have legal representation, they're ending in some type of resolution that's not eviction. eviction is devastating to families, devastating to communities. And so, you know, we know that not only is this true that when you have representation, you're less likely to be evicted, but the opposite is also true. So 90% of cases right now where someone doesn't have representation, they are being evicted. So for me, that tells us a story, again, where it's not necessarily that there isn't a way to resolution, but someone needs to make sure that they have counsel or representation so that they can, you know, try to resolve this. I think Pierce Greenberg did a great job. He's out of Creighton. He did an amazing job at giving us some great data on eviction in our community. And I really encourage you to check it out. This is a map of Omaha. And again, when we think about the formerly redlined areas of our community, they're also the areas where we see the highest rates of eviction. And these are schools that are within those areas that have significant eviction rates. So again, when we were talking about for every move a student has, that they fall behind 3 months in school. But again, the challenge isn't just having to move when you're evicted, it's trying to ever find permanent or any kind of stable housing ever again, because it makes it really difficult to become a renter or a homeowner. The promising precedent is the Cleveland Right to Counsel. We also have something really similar here in Lancaster County. The Tenant Assistance Project is doing great work. It's really similar to this. This is a partnership with the City, United Way, and Legal Aid. It's a $3 million program that provides legal counsel. The average cost really in Omaha is it's less than $100 per household to provide representation. And so a $2 million investment could actually help 20,000 households. The Homeowner Greenlining Fund. This one is based, the name is based on, again, the idea that we could do something opposite of redlining. So it's to try to address, again, those policies of racism and really the investment that went to white families that didn't go to Black and Brown communities. For when we look back from 1933 to 1968, we know that today the equivalent that was invested in white communities was $33 trillion. And it was specifically disinvested in Black and Brown communities. So when we think about trying to address this and really look at barriers to homeownership in our community, and again, we're going to look here in a moment in the disparities between white homeownership and non-white homeownership as well. It's really important that we address this issue. So the appraisal gap is something that is significant here in the study area. So let's say it takes $150,000 to build a house right now, right? With construction costs and things like that. That's pretty average to build a single family home, $150,000. If we place that home in the eastern portion of, I would say the northeastern portion of our community, we're having a difficult time seeing housing appraisals for $120,000, $130,000 sometimes, depending on where we put that new home. If we put that same new home in, again, the western portion of Sarpy County, it appraises at $310,000. Okay, so we are automatically upside down when we build a new home in certain parts of our community, and that's because of historical disinvestment and racism. So that's something we have to address. And this is one of the ways that we can start to hopefully increase the amount of home ownership and address that appraisal gap in our community. The Detroit Home Mortgage Program is our precedent. It's a $40 million fund for second mortgages, up to $75,000 to close the appraisal gap. It can be used for buy and move-in ready homes, to buy and renovate a home, and also refinance and renovate existing homes, which I really like. It was a public-private partnership. It was a Kresge and Ford Foundation seed. And I can tell you that when we talked to the folks that did this in Detroit, they said, you know, after a few of the homes started to be renovated and new homes started to be built in neighborhoods where they hadn't seen new construction in a long time, appraisal gap started to get less and less because the homes were appraising higher and higher. as they were seeing more investment in these communities. In Omaha, a $50 million investment with an average second mortgage of $40,000 could give us 1,250 mortgages. And again, it just comes back to this piece of when we look at home ownership, specifically 69% of white residents in our community own their home as compared to 35% of Black residents and 48% of Hispanic residents. So again, I understand that homeownership is not necessarily for everyone, but I would argue that not wanting to be a homeowner is probably not the reason for this gap in disparity in homeownership. Policy change. So to maximize the impacts of all the other investments, it's really important that we take a deep look at our policies and how we can create change and advocate for affordable housing in our community. These are just a few examples of how we could address policies, but we'd really like to dig deeper into this and dedicate energy to really figuring out how we can work together to look at both local and state policies and make sure that it's not policies that are becoming barriers to a need that we know is great in terms of affordable housing. Source of income discrimination with renters. We saw this during, again, COVID-19 and CARES Act funding, that into a lot of the leases, or some leases, I should say, amongst landlords, they have verbiage in the lease agreements that say that they can't accept payment from anyone other than the renter themselves. So they'll deny any kind of assistance, even if it's federal assistance during a pandemic, and that's legal. State LIHTC to match the 4% federal credit. Again, this is just right now we have a system where we're not necessarily accessing all of the federal funds that are available to us. And it makes it more difficult for those large scale affordable or mixed income deals to happen. And there is money available federally that we can work to match here at a state level. The missing middle zoning reform. I think just, again, that picture that we saw of how many of our housing units are single family versus the 2 to 4 plex buildings. And when we think about our current zoning policies, they're a bit antiquated for being able to implement more density and just really thoughtful density in some of our communities that have the most access to transit and other resources. And then TIF to support affordable housing. I'm not going to go much into that. I think that it's one tool, and I feel like it's really important when we have something that's a tax credit that we make sure that there is an affordability component to it. These are all precedents of similar states and communities that have done some of this work in source of income discrimination, their LIHTC programs, missing middle, and also TIF. And the potential impact is really to just make headway in all of those areas. So I won't go in again to this in much detail. So again, when we think about projected impact, there's a numbers side of things, right? We talked about the number of units that we could create and preserve, and homeownership and fewer evictions. And we can think about overall broader impacts of fewer visits to the ER for kids, or more jobs, and also, tax revenue and improve school performance. But I think part of the conversation is also, again, this concept of what do we believe as a community about housing? How important is it to us in our community that everyone has a home? And do we think housing is a human right in some level, right? Like, do we believe everyone deserves to have shelter? And also, do we think that the person who serves us coffee should have the opportunity to live in a neighborhood that they work in? Do we think that the person who cares for our child should be able to live in our neighborhood? Do we believe that the person that might sweep floors in our office should have to work 2 or 3 more jobs in order to afford a home for their family? And I think that that's another part of this conversation that's really important for us to have, because right now, housing it's not only not affordable for a lot of folks, but it's just not accessible for so many people. And there are so many challenges. And it really is something that is going to take all of us in order to address. And so I've been asking, like, what does cross-sector leadership look like when we're working towards addressing affordable housing in our community? And that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to having a conversation with all of you about today. Again, you know, there's no silver bullet. If there was, we would have done it. But I do think that we have an advantage in being in the middle of America and seeing what's happened on the coast and knowing it's coming, that we can start to plan and prepare. And I would also say that it's not like, when is this going to be a crisis? It's a crisis. It's a crisis for a lot of families. There were a lot of families during COVID-19 that almost lost their homes or did. And so this isn't, you know, something that might happen someday. This is something that's happening now. We need to address this now, and we have to work together to do it. So I'm going to get off my soapbox now and open this up for all of the questions that are probably in the chat. And I'll stop sharing this here for a minute. Zach, I don't know how you want to roll with questions or Q&A.
Yeah, so I've pulled some of the questions out of the chat box. We'll just kind of start at the top. And I'm going to take two questions together. Is there a plan for affordable housing for seniors with very low income or for families of 5 or more? Did you look at either of those specific groups in your study?
So we didn't pull out seniors or the number of units per housing. I will say that we did break down like what currently exists into those sub areas, like what numbers. We have a little more detail on the quality, the age of housing, how many units are available in what sub areas, and that'll come out in our final report. I promise to you all, it will be on the Omaha Community Foundation website before the end of March. So that's a good news. You can dig in a little deeper, but we didn't get that specific in terms of it does equate for like that 30% or less. And so we know that seniors who are on Social Security in our community or in the state of Nebraska, they are included in that 30% or less. So even LIHTC dollars don't quite cut it unless there's still developer equity when it comes to providing housing for that lowest bracket of income, and that includes seniors. So that was really kind of mind-blowing to me. I think it's $27,000 a year that our current Social Security allowances.
Great, thank you. There was a comment in the chat. It should be noted that LIHTC projects that are located in qualified census tracts or QCTs are rewarded in the application allocation process with the basis boost, thereby concentrating housing in certain geographies. Did you guys look at the effects of qualified census tracts at all?
Nope, we didn't. Again, this was to understand currently how many affordable units we have, what's going to be needed, and who are players in the game. So we, in terms of that, again, that goal of working towards advocacy policy pieces in the strategies, that would be the work that would come next. And, right. And we are, again, working on that implementation team now. So we're working into we're really looking at kind of 4 major initiatives that would come out of this work. And that's all coming. So to be announced soon. But yeah, taking those deep dives into those types of policies would be a part of that work. That wasn't a part of our initial study. This was to really assess what currently is, what's needed, and how can we be strategic in our investment in terms of philanthropy.
Got it. Yeah, so I might jump down the list and try to get back to some of these other questions, but jumping off from that point, we just talked about qualified census tracts, and those are typically defined as sort of low income neighborhoods is one way people might describe those census tracts. And you mentioned access to opportunity. Other people might refer to areas as areas of high opportunity. Are there strategies or can you discuss maybe some strategies to develop housing in high opportunity communities? What do we need to do to make this happen? And what kind of resistance, this is a telling question, what kind of resistance might you expect?
So again, I think that that's all part of that policy advocacy and organizing. So we need the community to organize around it. When we think about policies that currently exist, for instance, in the city code, there's a requirement if you have 10% or more of your development that is affordable, that you actually go into public comment. So you have to notify everyone in the public. And guess what the developers will tell you shows up at those meetings? It's not the people that are dying to have affordable housing. So that's a part of the piece that of the things we need to address as a community and make sure that advocates are at those meetings. But also, do we want to? I don't know. I think like looking at that code and looking at that policy and seeing if that's really the best route to the creation of affordable housing, because it discourages developers that already are few and far between who provide affordable housing from going into areas that traditionally aren't seen as affordable. And when there are light tech properties or projects that are approved in those areas, they are mostly for seniors. So again, I think that that's part of that stigma of who needs affordable housing. And we just saw that people who make an average median income at $77,000 of a household income a year are considered like workforce housing, and we need subsidy for that. So I think we have a stigma in our community about who lives in affordable housing, and everybody needs affordable housing, in my opinion. And so that's part of all of our work to get that done.
Yeah, absolutely. If you'll permit me to editorialize a little bit on this question.
Absolutely.
Something that we've talked about in the past, both within, our organization, and I think Meredith, you and I have had this conversation. When we start thinking about areas of high opportunity, one of the challenges that we face is that properties in those areas tend to be more expensive by virtue of their access to things like orbit or public transportation or better school districts or higher paying jobs. Those properties tend to be more expensive and therefore, often out of reach of affordable housing developers. Mm-hmm. And one idea that I've been talking about for a few years now is providing the same basis boost that we give to qualified census tracts to properties that will develop in areas of high opportunity, thereby helping to overcome some of that cost challenge and make those projects a little bit more financially feasible. So I
absolutely agree. Yeah, I was just having a conversation with Habitat about the challenge of land acquisition for them right now in Sarpy County as they've moved into Sarpy County, or the merger of the two organizations of Douglas and Sarpy County, and how different it is for them. They have completely different challenges in one area of town than they do in another. So the cost of land in those areas where they're near job centers is significantly different than it is in other areas of town.
Let's see. I think I just saw a question come in about, this is a good one. And I think hopefully you'll have some insight here. Assuming philanthropy will limit investments to nonprofit developers only, not private for-profit developers, does our community have enough nonprofit developer capacity to preserve and develop the affordable housing stock our community requires?
So first of all of the strategies that we are recommending are not just for philanthropy. So we're not just looking for philanthropic investment, although philanthropy does invest in nonprofits. So know that the strategies are for our community as a whole. So we're looking at our corporate partners and others to invest in this work. We have some restrictions because of our IRS status that we do have to give to nonprofits. So yes, and then no, absolutely, we don't have enough capacity, and that's one of the things that we need to work on. And I think we're like, I'll give an example of something else that we've been working on. We recently gave a grant to Omaha by Design to work on what we call the affordable housing playbook, and trying to create 3 designs that are affordable by design, but that are also pre-approved by the planning department, so that developers don't have to go through the step of getting planning approval, and we could make those available to anyone, so that hopefully younger developers or new developers who are interested in providing affordable housing could use something like that as well, and to incentivize other developers. So I don't think that these funds will be only accessible to nonprofit developers, by way of, again, if there's an interest there to invest in affordable housing, we want to make that accessible to people because we need everyone. And then again, on the other side of things, from a policy perspective, we really need the community behind the idea of what if we required 10% of all new construction to have affordable housing? It's an option. They're doing it in other places. So I think, again, it depends on how we organize and what message we send about how important this is to our community. So if that's a requirement, then everybody has to do it, not just the nonprofit developers.
Great. Oh, maybe on mute. Sorting through some of these other questions, to prevent and address housing instability, where does rental assistance fit in?
It's a great question. So yes, our match, as you know, Metro Area Continuum of Care for the Homeless has a program they started earlier than they anticipated because of 2020, but called Housing Problem Solving, and a big portion of that is rental assistance, and we've been big supporters of that. Again, often, a lot of families need $300. $300 is the difference between them having to be removed from their house or not, or that's the difference between being able to make your rent or not. And so being able to keep a family where they are because they have a certain circumstance, like a car breaks down or something like that happening, it makes a lot more sense than somebody having to move and you have to put down a new deposit and all of the costs associated with that. And so I think rental assistance is definitely appropriate. And it's something we've been investing in for a long time. So yes, rental assistance, but again, I also, I think working with landlord consortiums has been a part of the discussion around this work. So I think trying to incentivize landlords to work with clients and keep people in their housing is also a really important piece of this. But the more housing we can create, the hopefully, we're going to have more opportunity for more people. And again, even reducing that competition with where there are affordable units with folks that make a little more. So I think rental assistance is definitely part of this. I'd love us to see an expansion in our voucher program and to get more creative with that. Personally, I'd love to see Meridith had on a source of income discrimination banned where people have to accept housing vouchers. I know that I've seen that work in areas like Oregon, across the state, that they made it illegal for landlords to reject housing vouchers, and they created a pot of funds for maintenance so that if there are issues related to those units, they can actually help the landlords address those. So they created some like a pot of money that was able to support that policy work as well. So there are a lot of great examples of things that we could do here. And again, it's just going to take community support and everybody working together.
What about, someone asked, have you explored using affordable housing impact fees when you were looking at sort of best practices in other communities? Is that something that came up and that you looked at?
It might have been something that our consultants saw, but I don't think it was. I have not heard it called that, or if whoever that was wants to expand on what that is, I might be able to. But I don't know what that is, I guess. I haven't heard that term. Yeah, unless you're talking about the Chicago model and like fees for developers, if they don't include affordable housing, then it goes into a trust fund. I'm not sure if that's the same concept. I don't know who asked that question. Yeah, I would certainly just be sort of guessing, but I would imagine that would be kind of the idea, basically an impact fee similar to other development. Okay, yeah, that's something we've definitely looked at. But again, that's in that kind of future policy piece, because that's going to require policy change. So that's going to require our representatives to choose that as well. Let's see. One question that came in, and maybe I'll kind of bring up the topic more broadly. The question was, could the city reasonably tie TIF
to Class C housing. And I might just sort of broaden that up to, or out to, we've heard a lot over the past, let's call it 6 months, especially as we've been moving towards municipal elections here in Omaha, about TIF and affordable housing requirements. What have you seen work in other communities? Because it's certainly a hot topic in our community.
Again, I think TIF is one tool in our toolbox, and so it gets there's a lot of conversation around it. Rightly so, because it comes from our tax dollars. But I think we provided actually some examples of communities that have used TIF as a tool for affordable housing. With even a 15% set aside for TIF, it could create an additional 100 units of affordable housing every year. So there's another, option with if they don't want to include, and I guess that's maybe the question you just asked. We also looked at other communities where if they don't want to include affordability in that current TIF project, that they have to include it and it's within a certain geographic distance, or the set aside goes to funding, again, affordable units in another project. So we gave several examples of communities that are doing that, and we saw that it often works best when it's a 15% or higher. It wasn't working as well for communities that had 10% or lower.
Got it. Let's see. So one of the questions that came in sort of revolves around policy work at the federal level, specifically about funding for Section 8, not sort of historically not meeting demand. Let's see.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not personally working on tackling that at the federal level right now, because my focus is here. Sure. But absolutely, it needs to happen. I'd love to see, again, the voucher program expand, and I would also, love to see us ban source of income discrimination
I was going to say
including that.
It sounds like, expanding Section 8 funding only goes so far if we don't also ban that discrimination based on source of income. Because if you have a voucher but you have nowhere to use it, it's certainly that voucher is not worth much.
Yeah, I remember speaking with some folks that came to Omaha a couple of years ago and talking about affordable housing and talking about the voucher program. And at that time, they were like, well, we'll just give more vouchers to these folks, and if they want to move, they can use a voucher. And I was like, they're right. I think at that time there were 2,800 people with a voucher in hand that couldn't find an apartment to live in. I don't know what that list looks like right now, but that is not the solution unless we also address the issue of discrimination.
Question about the philanthropic investments in 2018. Looks like there was a $17 million for faith-based initiatives. Is that not included in any of the other categories like housing, human services?
Not to my knowledge, but that again, there were 9 foundations, and I would probably argue, I don't think that probably I would, on the record, on the recording right now, answering this question, I would guess that there are very few of them that came from our foundation, so I really can't speak to those specifically.
Got it. Well, I think this kind of wraps up the questions that I have pulled in. Does anybody else have any more questions they want for Meridith that they want to drop in the chat?
Also open to just any ideas or conversation. I would love to hear from any of you if you have other ideas and input. This is not like, again, I'm not the end all be all to affordable housing. I just been starting the conversation, and I'd love to hear your voices and your thoughts on any of this work, and a calling for all of you to come to the table with us and fight to make sure that we are providing quality and safe housing for everyone in our community. So.
Let's see. One question just came in, and I think it's a really good question to bring up. And that's when discussing solutions, strategies, will and how does Council Bluffs get included in this? Because I think that maybe the perception is that most of this conversation was about Omaha, but obviously Council Bluffs is part of the metro area as well.
Yeah, and we included all of the metrics you see. Council Bluffs was included in all of the market analysis that we did. Council Bluffs was included. Iowa West was one of our funding partners. And so again, the challenge becomes that state line and how, again, tax credits and some of the things work here in Nebraska and how those are different in Iowa. There are also some things that are easier in Iowa in terms of policies in place that are more amenable to affordable housing. So there will be different challenges. I don't know what that will look like yet in terms of the funding piece and how, what the investment would be in Iowa versus the investment in Nebraska. And that really just depends on where, again, next step is that we have a group that's working to take these ideas from that 30,000 foot to really where the rubber hits the road, and we're putting them into place. So trying to figure out how do we make this work in Omaha on an everyday basis? What does this look like? Who runs it? How do we move forward and making it work? So I think definitely Council Bluffs is considered in all of that. It was part of the study. We have all the same data on Council Bluffs, and the investment portion of it, again, with philanthropies there, they'll be included and invited to that. And then also a lot of the funding partners in Omaha fund both organizations that support Council Bluffs and also in Council Bluffs.
Great. I did get two questions kind of touching on the same topic, and probably a really good way for us to kind of wrap things up here. Are there opportunities to get involved as you look to translate this project towards implementation and policy? And what would those next steps be for advocates? Would they be getting in touch with you? How would they get involved?
So I know that there is some organizing going on. I wish Aaron was here. Matthew, I might have you, I might ask you to step in on the housing advocacy that's already going on. But I do know that there are groups that are starting to organize on a policy level. Part of our hope is that again, I would rather see a grassroots organization in our community around housing than us creating something and asking people to be part of it. But if that's what it takes, I'm happy to do it. I think that joining the MAPA Housing and Development team is another great step. I've been a part of that for a couple years, and I know y'all have been working hard on messaging and things like that around affordable housing. Feel free to contact me. I'll put my email here in the chat right now. And we just started implementation. It starts this month. And so we're working to get this hashed out over the next 6, hopefully to 8 months, and really work on those major initiatives. And I'm sure you will all hear about it, because we're going to try to scream it from the rooftops when we have it in place.
Well, thank you for that shout out to the MAPA Heartland 2050 Housing and Development Committee. I will also throw my contact information in the chat. If you are interested in getting involved in the Housing and Development Committee, we would love your help. We've been working on, to Meredith's point, messaging, and honestly, this report that she has spent so much time putting together is a huge part of helping people understand the challenges that our community faces, right? So historically, Omaha's been considered, or our metro area has been considered, a place with a relatively low cost of living. People consider it to be affordable to live here. And what we're learning from research and presentations like Meredith's is that while that's true for some, it's certainly not true for all in our community. And one of the tasks that we're working hard on with the Housing and Development Committee is finding ways to help move the needle in housing affordability on all levels. So if you're interested in getting involved in that, I've dropped my contact information in the chat and would love to hear from you. and have you guys join us for our Housing and Development Committee meetings.
Zach, I'll just add, or Meredith, since you mentioned me, that the biggest piece of housing justice legislation pending right now is LB 320, which will be heard in the legislature. It will be debated next week, and that's sort of become a landlord-tenant housing omnibus bill that will change some of the aspects of landlord-tenant court in the interest of I guess housing justice and parity for tenants. So that's the most immediate thing you could do if you are involved or concerned about these, is contact your state senator and tell them to support LB 320. That's coming up for floor debate, and it'll be a difficult fight. So I'd say that's first and foremost.
Thanks, Matthew. Appreciate it. Again, thank you all, and we'll definitely be relying on all the community stakeholders as we move forward, hoping to gain support, and happy to, again, share the presentation. Zach will have that available. If you have any questions, you have any feedback, love to hear from you. And thanks for your time today. Appreciate it.
Well, Meredith, allow me to thank you on behalf of Heartland 2050, as well as all of the folks that I'm seeing light up the chat with thanks. Thank you so much for the work that you put into this, and for coming today and presenting it. I really think that, I know this is the second time I think that I've seen this presentation, and I've come away with something new each time, and certainly thankful for the work that the Sherwood Foundation has put into this challenge in our community. So great job, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
That is everything that we have for this afternoon. A few questions about the presentation. Meredith, if you share that with us, we can send it out. I believe we'll be able to send it out to the folks that have registered for today's event. So for all of you kind of asking if it'll be coming out, it will be coming out to everyone. We have, next on our agenda is working group updates. Do we have any updates from the housing and development working groups? We may not. All right, our next Housing and Development Committee meeting is May 20th from 3 to 4:30. If you'd like to join us for that meeting, please either reach out to me via email, or you can use the link that was dropped in the chat to learn more about our committee. Thank you guys so much for joining us this afternoon, and for taking an interest in this issue in our community. There's a lot of folks that I saw on the list of participants that I know are already working hard in this space. And so thanks to those folks for doing the work, and thanks to the rest of you for joining us. With that, I am going to give everyone a few minutes of their afternoon back. Have a good afternoon, everyone.